She wore a rainbow wig, a fake wart, and a unibrow she had sculpted with the same brush she used for award-winning creature work, and she brought a garlic bagel to a formal arrangement dinner with the most dangerous man in Seoul's underworld. This was the plan. This was the entire plan. Naya had looked at herself in the mirror of the hired car and thought, no man alive would choose this. She had built wounds that made film directors weep. She had sculpted a burn scar so convincing that a studio medic once tried to intervene on set. Tonight, she had turned all of that talent against herself, and she was certain it would work. She had forgotten, briefly, that Lee Young was not a man who chose by accident. Table 9 did not exist on any public floor plan. She had checked. Twice. Then a third time, because thoroughness was what separated a master prosthetics artist from someone who just glued things to faces and hoped for the best. The ballroom beyond the silkscreen partition hummed with the particular silence of people pretending not to stare. Crystal chandeliers threw honeyed light across women in gowns that cost more than Naya's annual rent, and men whose stillness communicated the kind of authority that never needed to raise its voice. Seoul's underworld did not look like the movies. It looked like this: glass and pressed linen and the soft clink of danger dressed as dinner. Naya sat at table 9. She opened the garlic bagel she had smuggled in a linen napkin. The crunch, in that room, was almost violent. She chewed slowly, deliberately, with her mouth at a precise 45-degree angle she had practiced in the car. Across the table, separated by a single candle and 6 months of a debt she had never agreed to carry, Lee Young watched her. He was devastating in charcoal. She had expected someone who looked like a threat. He looked, instead, like a man who had already won and found the winning mildly interesting. His black tuxedo was buttoned to a standard that suggested someone had ironed it with a ruler. His hair was precise. His expression was the most expensive thing in the room, utterly, infuriatingly unhurried. He was cataloguing her. She could feel it. Every ridiculous, deliberately repulsive detail, the wig, the wart, the sweater she had chosen because it looked like it had survived 3 owners and 1 flood, he was filing it away with the quiet efficiency of a man who dealt in information for a living. Reject me, she thought, loading another bite of garlic bagel like a weapon. This is simple. You see this face, you call off the arrangement, you let me go back to my prosthetics table and my deadline and my life, and we never speak again. Lee Young reached across the table. His hand moved with that same unhurried certainty, the way a man moves when he has never once been told no and has stopped expecting resistance. His fingers found the edge of her wart, her masterpiece, and peeled it away with the calm precision of someone removing a price tag from a gift. He set it beside her water glass. The room had stopped breathing. Naya's chewing slowed. You missed one, he said. His voice was low and even, and it landed somewhere in her chest like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. His gaze moved, unhurried, cataloguing, to the small latex mole she'd placed below her jaw, the one she'd almost forgotten herself. The one under your chin. Silence. The dinner was adequate. He folded his hands. The estate in Jongno is being prepared. You will have your own studio, north wing, skylights, temperature controlled. Your stepfamily's financial access to your accounts has been severed as of this morning. Naya stopped chewing entirely. I did not agree to. You saved my life 6 months ago, Lee Young said, with the tone of a man correcting a minor factual error. Arguing with yourself about a prosthetic eyebrow while 3 of my enemies stood 6 feet away. You were so absorbed in your craft that you didn't notice the danger. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, exactly, but its precise, controlled ancestor. I noticed you. The candle between them flickered. Naya looked at the wart beside her water glass. She looked at the man across the table, who had peeled away her best work and looked at what was underneath and had not even for a fraction of a second, looked away. This, she thought, with the slow horror of someone watching their own plan dismantle itself in real time, was not how this was supposed to go. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and comment where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. 6 months before the garlic bagel. Naya had been arguing with a demon's eyebrow. Not a real demon. The demon belonged to a horror director named Sutton who had very strong opinions about the arch of his villain's brow and had communicated those opinions at length, via email, at 2 in the morning, using 17 exclamation points and a reference image that Naya was fairly certain he had found on a Halloween costume website. She was backstage at the Meridian Theatre in Manhattan, 40 minutes before curtain, with a silicone prosthetic pressed to her palm and a brush so fine it could have written a signature, and she was losing the argument with herself about whether the left arch needed 3 more millimeters of upward curl or whether she was, as her mentor once told her, over-engineering again. She did not notice the 3 men who entered through the service corridor. She noticed the eyebrow. The eyebrow was wrong. The upward curl was insufficient. The villain would walk on stage in front of 400 people and his face would read mildly inconvenienced rather than cosmically malevolent, and that was not acceptable, not on her work, not with her name. Northwest exit is compromised. The voice came from behind a rack of costumes. Low. Korean accented English, very precise, the kind of diction that came from someone who had learned the language with the same attention they gave everything else. Naya's brush paused. She did not turn around, because turning around would mean acknowledging that she had heard something she was not supposed to hear, and she had survived 29 years in New York by being extremely skilled at minding her business. She returned to the eyebrow. The contact was moved. Someone inside the building moved him. A second voice, rougher. Then a third, clipped, impatient. She couldn't see them through the costume rack, but she could hear the particular quality of the silence between the words, the kind that preceded something irreversible. Naya pressed the prosthetic to the silicone mold, smoothed the edge with her thumb, and thought, 3 more millimeters. Definitely 3. What she did next, she could not have explained afterward. The fire suppression panel was directly to her left. A standard theatrical system. She'd passed it every night for the 2-week run. It required a key to trigger manually, but the secondary alert, the maintenance ping that went to building security, could be activated by pressing the test button with enough force. She pressed it. The hallway filled with a flat, persistent alarm, not the full system, just the signal. Enough. She heard movement behind the costume rack, heard the sharp exchange of words, heard footsteps moving quickly toward the exit. Building security would arrive in 90 seconds. Whatever was about to happen in the northwest corridor would not, now, happen. She returned to the demon's eyebrow. She did not see the man who paused at the edge of the costume rack. Did not see him look at her, at this woman in a work apron arguing silently with a piece of silicone, apparently oblivious to everything except the arch of a villain's brow. Did not see the expression that crossed his face, precise and unhurried, filing her away. She found out, much later, that his name was Lee Young. That the contact who had been moved was one of his. That the 3 men who entered through the service corridor had not intended to leave. That the maintenance alarm had, in the clinical assessment of his people, saved his life and 3 others. She found out all of this at table 9, the night she wore a rainbow wig and brought a garlic bagel to a meeting she had never agreed to attend, trying to be repulsive enough that a Korean mafia boss would call off an arranged marriage that her stepfamily had signed her into without asking. It had not worked. Lee Young's primary American residence was in the Hudson Valley, 2 hours north of Manhattan, at the end of a private road that appeared on no mapping application and was guarded at intervals by men whose stillness communicated that they had not come to this career by accident. Naya sat in the back of a car that was too quiet, with leather seats that were too soft, watching the city dissolve into autumn trees, and conducted a very serious internal negotiation with herself about the difference between a trap and a situation. A trap was something you walked into without information. A situation was something you walked into with full information and made the best of. The distinction mattered. She had all the information. Lee Young's people had been thorough. A folder, delivered to her apartment at 6 that morning, had contained a summary of her stepfamily's activities. The joint accounts they'd been quietly draining, the contract work they'd invoiced through her studio name without her signature, the credit line opened in her name to fund her stepsister Aisha's boutique. 16 months of it. Documented. Organized. Delivered with the quiet efficiency of a man who did not make arguments, he made records. She hated that the records were correct. She hated, more, that the accounts had already been severed. That he had done something she had been trying to do for 3 years, get her money back, get her work back, get her name back, and he had done it between dinner and breakfast without apparently breaking a sweat. The car turned through iron gates, and the estate arrived. It was not what she had expected. She had prepared herself for something cold, glass and angles and the aesthetic of controlled menace. What she found was a house that had been here long enough to have opinions. Stone and wood and tall windows that held the October light without apology. The kind of house that said, "Things of value have happened inside me, and more will." A woman met her at the door, Sehyun, Lee Young's household director, who had the posture of someone who had managed logistics in environments where mistakes had consequences and had emerged from that experience extremely organized. She showed Naya the north wing without commentary. The studio was exactly as promised. Skylights, temperature control, a workbench that was better than the one Naya had spent 4 years saving for, and storage racking already calibrated to the humidity requirements of silicone prosthetic work. Naya stood in the middle of it and said nothing for a long time. He researched what I need, she thought. He didn't just offer a studio. He built the right studio. Mr. Lee will see you at dinner, Sehyun said from the doorway. 7 o'clock. Dress is informal. I don't own anything informal, Naya said, which was not entirely true, but was true enough for this particular conversation. Your wardrobe has been arranged. Naya turned. My what has been? But Sehyun had already left, with the quiet efficiency of someone who had anticipated the objection and had decided, professionally, not to engage with it. Naya looked at her new studio. At the skylights letting in October. At the workbench with the right humidity levels. She pressed her fingers to the edge of the bench and thought about invisible, about how she had spent her entire career being invisible, being the person behind the face, the artist no one photographed, the name in small print at the end of credits. About how the estate was already making that impossible. Every room was calibrated. Every detail was a form of attention. Invisible, she thought, is no longer an option here. It came in a garment bag on the 3rd morning, delivered by one of the estate staff with a card that bore no name. Just a suite number at a Manhattan hotel Naya did not recognize, and a note written in handwriting that was too careful to be casual, for the foundation gala. Thursday evening. We thought this would suit you. Naya unzipped the bag with the professional instinct of someone who had spent years in wardrobe departments. Her hands stilled. The gown was the color of old champagne. Structured, strapless, with a skirt that would have been beautiful on a different body, specifically, a body approximately 4 inches taller and 3 sizes smaller. The seam allowance had been cut to nothing. The boning in the bodice had been positioned for someone with a completely different architecture. And the hem, she held it up to the light, and there it was, a separation in the lining, deliberate, the kind that would hold together through getting dressed and the car ride and the first hour of an event and then, at precisely the wrong moment, would give. A pre-compromised garment. Naya set the dress on the workbench with the same care she gave every object she was about to analyze. She sat down on her stool. She thought about who had sent it, and she thought about why, and she thought about the particular flavor of cruelty that required advance planning. Not the hot, impulsive kind, but the cold, architectural kind. The kind that came from someone who had been planning longer than she'd been in the building. She had no name yet. She had only the suite number and the handwriting. She was still sitting there when Lee Young appeared in the doorway of the studio. He did not knock, but his presence was not intrusive. It announced itself through some quality of the air, a change in the atmospheric pressure of the room. He wore a dark grey shirt with the sleeves pushed to the elbows, which was the most casual she had seen him, and he was looking at the dress on the workbench with an expression that was not surprise. It was recognition. He crossed to the bench. Examined the hem. Examined the seam allowance. Set it down. He said nothing to Naya. He took out his phone, typed something brief, and replaced it in his pocket. What arrived at 1 o'clock was not another garment bag. What arrived was Sehyun, who informed Naya that a car was ready to take her to a specific address on 5th Avenue, where an appointment had been made in her name, open-ended, and the account was covered. Naya looked at Sehyun. Did he send me shopping because someone tried to sabotage my dress? Sehyun's expression did not change. The car is ready when you are, Ms. Naya. That's not a no. No, Soohyun agreed pleasantly, it isn't. Naya went. She told herself it was practical, she needed something to wear Thursday, and she was not going to the foundation gala in something that would split at the seam in front of the entire New York underworld's charity circuit. She told herself it had nothing to do with the fact that Lee Young had looked at the dress and understood immediately what it was, and had not asked her to explain it, and had not made her prove she wasn't being dramatic. He had simply, without ceremony or commentary, corrected it. She chose her own dress. A deep, saturated green, the color of old library shelves and serious ambition. The kind of dress that did not ask permission. Thursday arrived with the particular clarity of a late October evening in New York, cold and sharp and lit from below by the city's permanent insistence on being seen. Naya stood in the north wing mirror and looked at herself. The green dress fit because she had chosen it. Her hair was up, the kind of up that required 40 minutes and made it look like it had taken none. Her face was her own, no wigs, no warts, no rainbow deflection. Just the deep brown skin that Lee Young had catalogued across the dinner table at table 9 and had apparently found worth 6 months of patience. The thought made something move in her chest that she was not ready to name. He was waiting in the entry hall when she came downstairs. Black tuxedo again, different cut. This one had a quieter authority, as though it had been made by someone who understood that the man wearing it did not need the clothes to do any of the work. He turned when he heard her on the stairs. He looked at the green dress. He looked at her face. "Your choice," he said. "My choice," she confirmed. Something moved through his expression. Brief, precise, the controlled ancestor of satisfaction. He offered his arm, and she took it, and they went to the car. The foundation gala occupied the top 3 floors of a midtown tower and was attended by people who donated to causes with one hand and restructured power with the other. Naya had worked events like this before, invisible, professional, the person moving through the background. She knew how to be the person no one looked at. She walked in on Lee Young's arm and understood, viscerally, that this was not that. Every person they passed adjusted their attention. Not aggressively. It was the subtle recalibration of people who understood hierarchy and were updating their internal models in real time. Lee Young moved through the room as though the room had been arranged for him, and Naya moved with him, and it took her approximately 90 seconds to realize she had stopped trying to become smaller. The first introduction came from a man with silver cufflinks and the expression of someone making a rapid financial calculation. He looked at Naya with the particular assessment of someone waiting to be told her function. Wife, associate, ornament, liability. Lee Young said, without slowing, "Naya. She requires no introduction beyond that." The man blinked. Lee Young moved on. It happened again at the second introduction, and the third, and each time it was the same. Her name, offered flatly, conclusively, as though the name itself was sufficient and anyone who needed more information had misunderstood the architecture of the evening. She requires no introduction beyond that. Not her job. Not her function. Not her connection to him. Just her name, stated like a fact of geography. She is here, she exists, this is sufficient. By the third hour, Naya's hands had stopped calculating exits. She was standing near the window, looking at the city below, when she heard the shift in the ambient noise behind her. Not a disruption, something quieter than that. The particular quality of a conversation not meant for her but conducted nearby with specific directional intent. She did not turn around yet. His name, she had learned by now, was Minjae, Lee Young's right-hand man for 11 years. He was present at every event, stationed at the appropriate distance, close enough to be summoned, far enough to be deniable. He came to stand beside her at the window. Naya did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the city. "You don't know what this world does to people who don't belong in it," he said. His voice was even, conversational, calibrated to sound like concern. "You think you're being chosen. You're being collected." Naya said nothing. He has a function for everything. Every person in his life occupies a position. You are currently occupying a position that was not designed for you, and when it becomes inconvenient, the position will be adjusted. A pause. Fractional. I've been at his side for 11 years. I know what he keeps and what he releases. I know the difference between a woman he finds interesting and a woman he intends to protect. Another pause. You should step aside. Before the distinction becomes clear to him and the correction is made publicly. Naya turned her head, very slowly, and looked at him. She had sculpted faces for a living. She had studied the architecture of expression, the way emotion arranged itself beneath skin, the microgeography of feeling in the muscles around the eyes and mouth. She looked at Minjai's face the way she looked at every face, as a construction, as information, as a text she could read. What she found was not protectiveness toward Lee Young. What she found was something far older and less rational, a fixation that had been running so long it had calcified into architecture. 11 years of proximity had not produced loyalty. It had produced something that believed it owned the proximity, that had decided, somewhere in that decade of standing at the appropriate distance, that the position closest to Lee Young was its position, and anything that threatened that position was not a complication but an intrusion. He was not warning her for Lee Young's sake. He was warning her for his own. Naya looked back at the city. "I heard you," she said. "Then you'll be." "I said I heard you." Her voice was very even, the way her voice got when she was working, precise, without surplus emotion, a scalpel. "I didn't say I agreed with the diagnosis." A long silence. She could feel him recalibrating. This was not the response the warning had been designed to produce. "You're making a mistake," he said finally. "I've made several," Naya said. "I have a very good track record of surviving them." She heard him move away. She thought about what his face had told her. About 11 years. About a fixation that had been running underground so long it had started laying foundations. She thought about the dress that had arrived pre-compromised. She thought about the handwriting that was too careful to be casual. Minjai had just handed her a map without knowing it. Across the room, Lee Young appeared at her side. He said nothing, which was becoming a language she was learning to read. "Your right-hand man thinks I'm a temporary position," she said. "I know what Minjai thinks. He thinks you collect people. People have thought many things about me. Most of them were working with incomplete information." "And what's the complete information?" He turned his head, and she felt the full weight of that unhurried gaze. "That I have been patient for 6 months," he said, with the quality of correcting a minor factual error, with someone who brought a garlic bagel to a formal arrangement and called it a strategy. Naya felt something move in the architecture of her expression. She kept it in place, barely. "And," she said. "And patience," Lee Young said, "is not something I extend to things I consider temporary." The city below kept its noise. The gala kept its ambient hum. Naya stood at the window with the green dress she had chosen herself and the feeling of a key turning in a lock she had not yet decided to open. But she had stopped, somewhere between the window and the warning and the weight of his gaze, calculating the exits. That, she thought, was the most dangerous thing that had happened to her all evening. And she suspected, with the particular instinct of a woman who built faces for a living and had just read the wrong face at the wrong window, that Minjai suspected it too. Which meant that whatever he was planning, it would not stay at a compromised dress. Which meant the real danger had not yet arrived. And this time, she wasn't sure a quarter would be enough to save her. Subscribe now, the vault scene is coming, and you do not want to be late. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I want to say hello to every single one of you. She found out about the North Gate on a Tuesday. It was accidental, the way the most useful information always was, not discovered through strategy but stumbled into through ordinary circumstance, the universe deciding that someone had earned the right to know. She had come back from the estate's lower-level workroom at 11 in the evening, carrying a tray of pigment samples she'd been calibrating under artificial light, taking the long corridor because the shorter one was being resealed after a pipe repair. The corridor passed the east sitting room. The door was not fully closed. She heard Aisha's voice first. She knew it the way you know the voice of someone who has been borrowing from you for years without asking, intimately, with a particular flavor of exhaustion. Aisha, her stepsister, who should have been in Brooklyn, who had no reason to be in the Hudson Valley, who was standing in a room in Lee Young's estate speaking to a man in a low, transactional voice that Naya had last heard on a phone call discussing her studio's invoices. She stopped walking. "The rotation changes at 11:40, Minjai said. The northwest corridor goes dark for 4 minutes. That's the window. And she won't know until she's already through. She won't know at all. The north gate looks like a service exit. She'll think she's being redirected. A pause. By the time Lee Young realizes she's gone, she'll be off the property. After that, the story writes itself. She left, she wasn't suited to this, she made her own choice. He can't disprove it if there's no record of anything else. Aisha said something about the accounts, about the studio contract, about what happens to both once Naya was no longer a relevant party. Naya stood in the corridor with her pigment samples and understood, with the cold clarity of a woman who had spent years being underestimated by people who loved her strategically, that Aisha had not come here for her. Aisha had come here for what Naya's absence would free up. The accounts. The contract. The financial proximity to a man with the kind of resources that made people revise their loyalties in real time. She had known Aisha was capable of borrowing without asking. She had not known Aisha was capable of architectural betrayal. She walked back to the north wing and sat on her workbench for a long time, not moving, thinking about camera rotations and 4-minute windows and service exits that looked like choices. She thought about telling Lee Young. She thought about what it would mean, to walk to wherever he was in this enormous, calibrated house and say, "Your right-hand man and my stepsister are building a corridor to remove me." She thought about what kind of woman did that, and whether that woman was her, and whether she had become, somewhere between the garlic bagel and the green dress and the window at the gala, someone who asked for help before she tried everything else. She had not yet tried everything else. She set the pigment samples aside and began to think. What she had not accounted for was that Minjai was not waiting for Tuesday's rotation. He moved on Wednesday. In retrospect, she understood why. The camera rotation was a contingency, a clean option, something that would produce an exit with no fingerprints. But something had changed his timeline. She would find out later that Lee Young had made a call that morning to his legal team, about a document that formalized Naya's position in a way that would complicate the story of a woman who had simply left. Minjai had found out about the call the way men like Minjai always found out about things. Through 11 years of proximity, through access, through knowing which doors to stand near. He moved before the document was signed. Naya was in the lower-level archive corridor at 3 in the afternoon, having been told by one of the junior staff that a reference case she'd requested had been moved to the climate-controlled storage at the end of the East Hall. It was a plausible errand. The staff member had delivered it without visible anxiety. She had followed the directions without sufficient skepticism. Not the walking into the corridor, but the walking without remembering what she knew. The archival vault door closed behind her. The lock engaged with a sound that was very small and very final. The temperature, which had been cold when she entered, began to do what the temperature in an archival vault does when the climate system has been manually adjusted. It dropped, steadily, with the patience of a mechanism that had no feelings about outcomes, only parameters. The vault was built for documents. It was indifferent to people. Naya stood in the blue-white light of the preservation system and did not panic. She had spent her career in spaces that required absolute control of the hands and the face. Panic was something she had trained herself to defer, not eliminate, but postpone, file under later, deal with after the immediate problem had been addressed with all available resources. She inventoried her available resources. Her phone. No signal. The vault was lined with the same shielding used in document preservation facilities. Her pockets, a flathead tool she used for prosthetic seam work, 2 pigment capsules, a chapstick, and a single coin, a quarter, left from the coffee machine on the second floor. She looked at the coin. She looked at the walls. She thought about what she knew about archival vaults in estates built before 2010, when maintenance alerts, the kind that went to a building's external monitoring service, were triggered by a specific low-voltage circuit located behind the secondary utility panel. The utility panel in archival spaces was always placed near the door, within reach of maintenance workers. She found it on the left wall, 8 inches above the floor. The panel cover required a flat head to open. She had a flat head. The low-voltage circuit required a conductive bridge across 2 specific contacts. Small, flat, and conductive. She had a quarter. Naya knelt on the floor of the vault in her work clothes, in the blue-white light, in the dropping temperature, and she worked with the same focus she brought to every problem that required her hands. Slow breath. Steady grip. The flat head found the contacts. The quarter, positioned precisely, bridged them. Somewhere in the estate's external monitoring system, a maintenance alert registered. She sat back on her heels, pulled her jacket tighter, and waited. She thought about the demon's eyebrow at the Meridian Theatre, and the maintenance alarm she had pressed without fully understanding what she was doing, and how that moment of instinct had set in motion 6 months of events that had ended here, in a vault, with a quarter and a prayer to a maintenance system that was older than her. She thought about Lee Young saying patience is not something I extend to things I consider temporary. She thought, hold on then. I'm sending you a signal. She counted. At 4 minutes and 17 seconds, she heard the door. It was faster than she expected. More direct. The vault door opened, and the cold poured out, and Lee Young was standing in the entrance. He was in his charcoal jacket, the one from the dinner at table 9. He was not alone. 2 of his security team were behind him, and behind them, held with a grip that was not gentle, was Minjae. Minjae's face was the most interesting thing she had seen all day. It was the face of a man who had run every calculation and had found, arriving at the vault door with his employer's hand already on the lock, that he had miscounted. Lee Young crossed the vault in 4 steps. He took his charcoal jacket off in one motion and put it around her shoulders, and the warmth of it was so immediate and so complete that something in Naya's carefully maintained composure shifted, moved, threatened to come undone. His hand stayed on her shoulders for a moment. He was looking at her face the way he looked at everything, cataloguing, filing, noting, checking for damage. The quarter, she said, because she needed to say something that was about practical facts and not about the warmth of the jacket or the 4 steps he had crossed the room in without hesitating. The maintenance circuit. I used a quarter to bridge the contacts. His hands didn't move from her shoulders. I know, he said. The system is pre-2010. The panel was on the left wall. I know. I wasn't sure you'd. I know, he said, for the 3rd time, quietly, with the quality of a man who was saying something else entirely and trusting her to translate it. She stopped talking. Behind him, Minjae made a sound, not quite a word, something that was trying to be a justification and failing. Lee Young turned his head, a single degree, the way a very precise machine makes a very small adjustment. He said 2 sentences in Korean, low, stripped of everything except information. But he said the end in English, deliberately, so that she would hear it. You are no longer present in any room I occupy. This is final. One of the security team took Minjae's arm. Minjae looked at Naya, and what she saw in his face was the last stage of a man who had believed his proximity was ownership. The moment when the belief collapses and what's underneath is just loss, ordinary and undignified and too late to renegotiate. She did not feel satisfaction. She felt something quieter and more useful, the specific relief of a structure that has been unsound finally being taken apart before it falls on someone. He was walked out of the vault corridor. She never saw him again. Suyun appeared at the door with a blanket. Naya accepted it. She looked at Lee Young, who had not moved. Aisha was here, Naya said. She is being escorted off the property. She came for the accounts. The accounts are no longer accessible to her. The studio contract is in your name only, with a clause that requires your written consent for any third-party use. He paused. It was always in your name only. The clause is new. Naya looked at him. You added it this morning. I added it this morning. And Minjae found out. Minjae had been finding out about too many things for too long. That is a separate failure of mine. How did you know where I was? She asked. The maintenance alert. Something moved in his expression. Brief, barely perceptible. You triggered a maintenance alert once before to protect something worth protecting. I thought it was worth finding out if you'd done it again. The vault was still cold. The charcoal jacket was still warm. Naya stood in both of these facts simultaneously and thought about the Meridian Theatre and a demon's eyebrow and a fire suppression panel and how the smallest accidental decisions had trajectories you couldn't see from the point of origin. She had pressed a button without fully knowing why. He had been paying attention ever since. The rooftop of the Hudson Valley estate faced west, which meant that in the late afternoon it held the light for longer than any other surface, a ledge of warmth above the valley while everything below had already gone blue. Lee Young found her there the next morning. He brought coffee. He placed it on the low wall beside her without asking and stood at the appropriate distance, looking at the valley. She had been thinking about Tokyo. An envelope from So-Yun had appeared on the studio workbench the night before, a production studio address, a project title, a timeline. A film in pre-production with a prosthetics requirement that was, by any objective measure, the most technically ambitious thing she had been offered in her career. The kind of project you got when someone had told the right people your name with the right weight behind it. You contacted them, she said, without looking away from the valley. I mentioned your work, he said. They contacted you. That's a distinction that depends a lot on tone. It does, he agreed, without apology. She looked at the valley. A hawk was doing something slow and confident on a thermal below the rooftop line. She watched it and thought about all the calculations she had been running since Table 9, all the exit assessments, all the risk analyses, all the professional maintenance of appropriate emotional distance from a situation that had been, from the beginning, more than a situation. She had been hiding, she thought, with better production values than the rainbow wig. The wig had been obvious. What she'd been doing since was the same impulse with better craft. Staying in the studio, staying in the work, staying in the parts of herself that didn't require her to receive anything from anyone. She was very good at building things that made other people feel. She was less experienced with letting herself be the recipient. The Tokyo project. What's the timeline? They want a response by the end of the month. Pre-production begins in January. Principal photography in March. 6 months. 6 months in Tokyo. Or, he said, 6 months with someone who has business in Tokyo frequently and finds the city significantly more interesting with the right company. Naya turned and looked at him. He was looking at the valley, not at her, which she had come to understand was not avoidance. It was the way he offered things. Without pressure. Like setting the coffee cup on the wall, placing something within reach without requiring her to receive it on his schedule. She thought about the vault. About 4 steps without hesitating. About patience is not something I extend to things I consider temporary. About a jacket that was still, if she was being honest with herself, faintly present in her memory as the warmest thing that had happened to her in a very long time. She thought about Aisha and the accounts and the pre-compromised dress and everything her stepfamily had taken while she was busy being invisible, being professional, being the person who survived things. She thought about how Lee Young had severed the accounts before breakfast. How he had corrected the dress without making her explain it. How he had crossed the vault in 4 steps and put his jacket around her before saying a single word. She had been waiting for the cost to arrive. For the moment when someone who chose you presented the invoice. She had been waiting because that had been the structure of every relationship in her life. Her stepfamily choosing her and then counting the return, again and again, until she was the books they balanced themselves against. Lee Young had given her a studio with the right humidity levels and added a clause to a contract without telling her and come to a vault because she had used a coin to say I'm here and he had been listening for exactly that. She could not find the invoice. She reached into the pocket of her jacket and took out a small latex mole. She carried them the way some people carried lip balm, occupational habit, and she leaned across the space between them and pressed it, with precise professional fingers, to the side of his cheek. He went very still. You missed one, she said, which was what he had said to her at Table 9, with the wart beside the water glass and the room that had stopped breathing. He turned his head slowly and looked at her. And then, for the first time, in all the weeks she had been cataloguing his expressions, he laughed. Not a performance of a laugh. Not the controlled, managed version of amusement. An actual laugh, unguarded, brief, real, the sound of a man caught completely without his stillness for exactly 1 second. It was, she thought, the best thing she had built in years. And she had not built it. It had just happened. She held out her hand. After a moment, he took it, unhurried, certain, the way he did everything. Tokyo, she said. Tokyo, he agreed. The valley held its light below them. The hawk completed its slow, confident circuit and disappeared below the tree line, and the rooftop stayed warm longer than anything else, the way west-facing things do, holding on to what the day had offered for as long as the day would allow. Naya looked at the man beside her, the latex mole still on his cheek, the charcoal jacket folded over the wall, the coffee going cold because neither of them was paying attention to it anymore, and felt, for the first time in as long as she could accurately measure, like someone who had not survived something but arrived somewhere. That was different. She had not known, before this, that the difference was possible. But Tokyo is only the beginning. And the people Minjai worked for? They haven't been handled yet. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I want to say hello to every single one of you and know exactly how far this story has traveled.